Hello YouTube, how's everyone doing? It's Professional here. So today I have a channel update video for you guys. If you guys aren't familiar with these are videos in which I talk about a specific topic on my channel, like to discuss it, but I also like to thank everybody who super chatted me, supported me through Patreon, channel membership, super thanks, and also to my moderators who helped me out tremendously since the previous channel update video. And so I will have them all up on the screen. I want to thank again my moderators for helping me to moderate my stream chats. You guys helped me out tremendously. And thank you to my Patreon supporters and my channel members and everybody who super chatted and super thanked me since the previous channel update video. You guys help support the channel greatly, and I really appreciate everything that you guys have done for me. You guys are awesome, and it means a lot to me. Now, in this video, I want to talk about retail again. I've made a few of these videos. I'll link them at the end. I made videos talking about, retail horror stories, day shift, and then also I made a separate video on night shift. But in this video, I'm not really going to be talking about the stories, though I might, mention them a little bit to explain the, when I'm going to be covering the guide, basically, in this video. But I'm going to go over them really quickly. But basically, this video, instead of me talking about stories, because I've pretty much covered all of my retail horror stories, there's very little to none left to cover. What I will be talking about in this video is I'll be talking about the top 10 tips to survive retail. This is if you're working in retail, is, how to avoid these situations. If you come across these really bad situations, basically how to deal with them and, what you should do. Now, personally, I don't want to get anybody fired, so I don't know how, I don't know how your boss would react in these situations and stuff like that, but I'm just basically saying about how I would react in these situations. If I could basically go back the clock and, go back years when I was working in retail, and I had to deal, because all of these problems that I'm going to be listing out, these 10 problems, I've dealt with all of these problems routinely. And I will basically be talking about what I would have done in this situation differently. Because that's one of the biggest regrets I have in my life, is that I had a lot of things I went through in retail. I didn't really know how to deal with them. I didn't know how to stand up for myself. But I'll be basically going through a bunch of situations that I encountered. And if you work in retail, or you've worked in retail, or even if you work in fast food, because this video is geared mostly towards retail workers, but some of the stuff is very similar to fast food. Also, fast food workers deal with a lot of similar stuff. Is you have probably dealt with at least two of these things, two or three of these things. Chances are you probably dealt with a lot of them too. And I know some people might comment and say, "Oh, Professional, I have a great boss. He's nice to me and stuff like that." Okay, that's great. I'm happy for you. But the thing is that a lot of people have very bad situations where they have really terrible bosses, really terrible companies, and even if you have a really good boss, you might have a really terrible company that still treats you like garbage. And in retail, there's a general stereotype that retail workers are treated like garbage by their companies, and in most cases that is true. There are a few companies like Costco, for example, that are better and treat their workers better, but a lot of other places, they just treat their workers like absolute garbage. But anyways, let me just start this video here. And also, I will say this is, I know there's a lot of my viewers that live also in other countries, but I'm going to be basically making this guide towards my country in America. So when I'm going to be discussing laws and stuff like that, I'm going to be discussing laws specifically to my country in America. So again, I don't want to get anybody fired if you follow these tips. This is just more what I would have done. So if I could go back the clock, what I would have done to stop these bad situations from happening to me in retail. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video. But anyways, let's start this off here. We're going to start with number 10. And also I want to say, I'm speaking all of this from the heart. I have no script. I did not write this down. The only thing I have is I just have a list of 10 things, bullet points. That's it, on my notepad. But I'm going to be speaking everything from the heart. I just have a list just so I remember the list in order. But I'm speaking everything from the heart here. I'm not using a script. So I want to say with number 10 thing is, do not let them mess with your schedule. So when you first start working in retail, you have to explain to them your clear boundaries. Explain to them, I cannot work on this day, or I cannot work on this time. I'm busy. I'm going to college. I'm, helping my family. Maybe I have another job. I'm doing something else. Be very exact with them, direct with them. Tell them, I cannot work on these days, and make sure that they accept it. And make sure that you get it in writing. What I would personally recommend is to just text the boss and tell the boss, okay, these are the days I cannot work, and these times I cannot work. And make sure that your boss agrees to that, and make sure you save that text message. So in the future, if your boss tries to basically mess with your schedule, you can just pull up that email, that text message, whatever it was, and just say, nope, you agreed to it. It is right here. So make sure you just make clear outlines on that. And even after I made clear outlines to my boss on my schedule, my boss constantly would mess with my schedule. He would constantly put me at ridiculous hours that I was not supposed to be working. He would put me on days that I was not supposed to be working. My biggest regret is that I did not get this in writing. It was just a verbal thing telling him I can't work on these days. These days I go to school. I'll go to when I was going to college. But it was that I should have gotten it in writing, so I could basically just show that to his face right there and say, you agreed to this. So I will say that in retail places are notorious. They are notorious for messing with people's schedule. If you work in retail, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They mess with your hours. They mess with your schedule all the time. And I will tell you, my boss, and excuse my language on this, I'm going to curse right now. I don't really curse a lot. My first boss, the first boss that I had, was a complete dumbass. Like, literally, a complete idiot, a complete scumbag. What he would do is he would constantly change my schedule the day before. So literally, what would happen is I would not be working one day, right? And I would not be there to place that day. And then the next day, I didn't think that I was working. He would change the schedule that one day before. And then what he would do is he would wake me up in the morning, wake me up at 7:30 in the morning and just say, where are you? You're on the schedule. Why aren't you coming in? And stuff like that. And I would just, half asleep, just telling the boss, what are you talking about? I wasn't supposed to be working. And he would just say to me, the schedule's changed. Like, but nobody told me. Like, the schedule didn't change yesterday. And then he told me, that's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to find out if the schedule has changed. Call the store and ask if your schedule has changed. And so what he would do is he would constantly change the schedule one day before. And what would happen is every single day I had to call the store. Every single day in the afternoon, right before they're closing, I had to call them. And I could tell I was annoying the cashiers too, because they would have to talk to me and check the schedule too. But I was just making sure that the boss wasn't going to screw me over again and do the exact same thing. He would never reach out to me. He would never text me. He would never call me. He would never tell me, oh, Pat, your schedule's changed or anything like that. And even if you're going to change my schedule the next day, you should ask for my permission. Because what if I'm doing something the next day? What if I'm busy? If I'm not supposed to be working, you can't just change somebody's schedule the day beforehand to put them on shift the next day. You can't do something like that. And he's a complete dumbass because you say, oh, Pat, it is your responsibility to find out if the schedule has changed. That is not my responsibility. No, it is your responsibility, dumbass, because if you change my schedule, you should tell me. If you are changing my hours, if you are putting me on another day that I was not supposed to be working, you are supposed to text me. You're supposed to text me or call me and tell me, hey, Pat, your schedule changed. Can you please come in on this day? That's what you're supposed to do. You don't just change somebody's schedule and not tell them and expect them to just come into the store like that. It was the most annoying thing. And I cannot stand that personally, just thinking about that. It's your responsibility to find out the schedule has changed. It was just so annoying. It was ridiculous. And the guy didn't even really care about his job. He had a lumber business that was his main source of income. He was just that retail manager just for some side income. A lot of times he would just sit in the office on his phone, basically not doing anything. But the worst incidents that I've had with my schedule changing, I remember, is that one time I was working at I was put on schedule at 11 o'clock in the morning. And what happened is that I went to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was going to wake up at around 9:50, 10 a.m. I live only basically 5 minutes from the store, so I was always fine to wake up basically an hour before my shift. But basically, what happened is I was supposed to be working 11 that day. The store opens at 7. And I get woken up at 7 o'clock in the morning by the supervisor, and she says to me that the manager didn't put anybody else in the schedule, and I need you to come in right now. And I told her, I need to have breakfast first. And then she's like, no, you can have breakfast here. Come in now. Nope, I'm going to have breakfast first. It was one of the few times I did stand up for myself. And I shouldn't have even come in at that time. I was due at 11, but because the manager was a dumbass and he, put me at, he did not put anybody else in the schedule at that time. He only put the supervisor opening, and I ended up going. I had cereal really quick. I ended up going, and I went to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning. I was fine having 7 hours of sleep, so I would have, been 3 o'clock and then woken up at 10. It would have been 7 hours, wouldn't enough for me. But there I had 4 hours of sleep. I went to work. I toughened it out. Then 2 weeks later, he put me at 11 o'clock in the morning again. This time I went to 4 a.m. to sleep. And I know I should have, gone to bed earlier. But the point is that I wasn't expecting to be working at 7. I was expecting to be working at 11. So I was expecting I would, sleep for 6 hours, wake up at 10, and then go to work. But the exact same thing happened. Supervisor, calls me at 7 o'clock in the morning, wakes me when I had less than 3 hours of sleep, tells me that there is, I have to come into work right now. And again, the same thing, you'll have breakfast here. No, I had breakfast at home, and then I went, and my dad was basically yelling at me at the time. I remember he's like, "Don't go." It's they're being idiots. Don't go. You're half asleep. Don't go. But I ended up going, and I made a big mistake because it was a snowstorm outside too. It was snowy, windy at the time, but I got there. It was only a 5-minute drive, so I did get there. But what happened is I toughened out my shift. I toughened it out, and I was supposed to go home at 12 that day. And then there was actually a guy that was supposed to come in and take over at 12, and the guy calls and says, oh, I cannot make it because of the snowstorm. That's what he says. And by that time the snowstorm wasn't even that bad. It wasn't, the roads were fine. It wasn't, that bad. And the guy was lazy. I knew that guy was lazy. He was incompetent. He was just not a good worker, and he always threw other stuff on other people. It wasn't a supervisor, just a regular store associate. But now the supervisor told me I gotta stay for 2 more hours. So now I was supposed to leave at 12. I stayed for 2 more hours until 7 to 2, and I basically, when I went home, I just passed out. I just fell asleep. And then when I tried to talk to the manager about that, the manager basically said to me, it is your responsibility. No, it is not. It is not my responsibility. If you're going to be stupid with the schedule, if you're going to mess stuff up like that, then that is on you. That is on the manager. It's the manager's responsibility to tell people it is not my responsibility. But he was an idiot. And the assistant manager, she at least apologized to me. At least she apologized to me for my schedule getting messed up that badly. But I've had other incidents where I got woken up in the morning so many other times because, he decided to change the schedule the night before and he didn't even tell me. Like, that is the stupidest thing ever. You could change the schedule the night beforehand and you don't even tell people. And so that's what I would say is that if I could go back in that situation, if I could go back in time, I would basically say, no, I am not coming in. I am not. I was due at 11 o'clock in the morning. That is when I am going to come in. It is not my responsibility that you messed up the schedule like this. It is not my responsibility you didn't put anybody else on the opening, that you only put a supervisor. That is not my responsibility. It is your responsibility. I'm going to come in at 11, how it's supposed to be. Now I'm going back to sleep and sleeping for a couple more hours. So that's basically what I would say is that number 10 is that make a clear outline and to say that this is the days I can work, and this is the days that I cannot work. And you are not to mess with my schedule. You are not to do stuff like that. And if you mess with my schedule, you put me on, I'm not coming in. That's it. And don't feel guilty about it. Don't feel guilty about it. And don't feel guilty about your coworkers being, having more work to do that day. Don't feel bad about that because it is not on you. It is on your manager. If your coworkers are short, if they're one less person short because the manager messed up your schedule, that is on them. You don't have to come in that day. If you did not know about that and he changed the schedule one day beforehand, it's not on you. Now, moving on to number 9, next thing is we are dealing with rude customers and scammers. I decided to put both of these together because both of these are people interactions that you have outside of your company. But let's start with the less worse one, the rude customers first, and then we'll move on to the scammers. But about the rude customers is, I will tell you this. And I've had a lot of people come. One of the reasons I made this video is because when I do live streams, I have a lot of people that actually come to my live streams and they tell me, I'm starting my job in retail. And how should I deal with these customers and stuff like that. I've seen so many comments, even super chats, people give me donations asking me, how do I, deal with these, customers in these type of situations. But I will say this, and I don't want to sound extremely negative when I say this, but when you work in retail, your personality is going to change. It is. Even if you were the nicest person ever, your personality is going to change, and your personality is going to become more negative. That's just what's going to happen. Is nobody goes into working into retail and becomes more of a happier person. If you go into retail and you work there for years, you're going to become more of a negative person. It's going to happen. Even if you were the nicest person. That's the same thing for me. Is when I started working right after high school. I remember I was like 19 years old, and I was a very naive kid. I was much more cheerful than I am today. So it did change me personality wise. I'm not like a rude person to people today, but it's like I wouldn't say I'm as positive as I was, when I finished high school. When I finished high school, I was more cheerful, a more positive person, and that is, one of the reasons that, I became much more emotionless was because of dealing with these customers in retail. And here's the big misconception that people have about retail. This is what people do not understand, is people say, I am the nicest person ever. I help people all the time. It doesn't matter. It does not matter even if you are the nicest person on this planet. You are going to encounter rude people that are going to curse you out and are going to treat you like garbage. If you work there enough, years, months, you are going to encounter somebody. It's going to happen. You are going to eventually encounter somebody that's going to curse you out, somebody who's going to yell at you for something that is completely out of your control, something that is not your fault at all. You are going to have people that are going to talk crap to you. And when I started working in retail, I never imagined that people could be that rude and nasty. Like I said, I was a very naive 19-year-old kid. I knew there was rude people in the world, obviously, but I never imagined that somebody could just treat a retail worker just that poorly, just treat them just so badly and just blame them for just stuff that is, completely out of their control. I never thought that somebody who is somebody who, for example, they have like a $1 coupon, like they will use like 20 coupons, and the transaction will go down from like $80 to like $5. They'll use so many coupons, so like an entire book of coupons. But then there's that one coupon that does not go through, that $1 coupon, and they've already gotten they brought down an $80 checkout price, the $5. They're already saving $75. But then there's that $1 coupon that doesn't work, and then they explode over it. Like, they expect every single thing to go through, and even if you explain to them this is not for this item, this is what the rules state, even if you take out the manufacturer's coupon and you read the rules that are specifically on it and you explain to them, they will still go ballistic. They will curse you out. They will they will threaten to call corporate. They'll want to talk to your manager, stuff like that. And this is this is basically what I say is just disgusting when you're dealing with stuff like this. And I remember one time I had a situation with a customer where she wanted me to basically check in the stock room for Ensure. And the Ensure protein shakes, like those really big, boxes. We're not talking about like the 6-pack, we're talking like the boxes of Ensure. They're like a protein drink. And our stockroom was in the basement, and there was a big staircase that was going up. And the belt that was actually going down at that point, it was blocked. It was blocked full of stuff, so there was no way for me to, use the belt. And so I found 2 boxes of those Ensure drinks. I loaded them up. I was like hugging them basically, and then I was walking up the steps carefully. And this was tall steps. I could have fallen down those steps and really hurt myself. Now, I went, upstairs, opened the door with one hand, and I went across the store. I put it on the counter. And, my back was hurting. I was tired. I was exhausted at that point, carrying those 2 boxes, up and across the store. And do you know what she says to me? She says, "Oh, it's not on sale? Why didn't you tell me? I don't want them now." And just left. That was it. And I was like, oh my God. It was just, stuff like that is like you clearly see that the employee had, gone above and beyond for you, and, you treat them like that. So how do you deal with these rude customers? How do you deal with these situations? How do you deal with people doing this crap? Here's what I would say to this. If you encounter somebody that has an attitude, they have an attitude problem, and they start cursing you out, and they start blaming you for stuff that is not in your control, here's what I would say to them. This is what I would say. And this I actually did do. This I did do to a customer. This is actually the last month that I was working retail, because I knew I worked for retail for 6 years, by the way. The last month that I was working retail, I knew that I was only going to be working there for another month, so I really didn't care at that point. I wouldn't say that I was like heartless and stuff like that, and I didn't help people, but I wasn't as, attentive to a lot of these customers. But if I encountered somebody that they gave me an attitude problem, like they stopped me in the aisle and then they cursed me out and they were blaming me for some transaction at the front or something like that, you know what I would typically say to them? I would say to them, "Sir or ma'am, I'm trying my best to help you. If you continue being rude to me, I'm not going to help you." That's what I would always say. That statement. That's what I would recommend people say. If you're dealing with a customer that's rude, and even if you're the cashier, even if you are at the cashier and they're doing the exact same thing, they're causing you a scene, they're being rude to you, they are cursing you out, they're being nasty to you, and for something that's completely out of your control, you say the exact same thing to them. You say, "Sir, ma'am, I'm doing my absolute best to help you. If you continue being rude to me, I am not going to help you." And if they continue being rude to you, don't help them. Just walk away. If you are in the aisle, just walk away. Say, "Get somebody else. I told you I would help you if you continued, if you stopped being rude to me, I would help you. But if you kept being rude to me, I said I wouldn't help you." And you don't deserve that. You're getting paid a little bit above minimum wage. You don't deserve verbal abuse from somebody. You don't. And I will say this, when I walked away from those customers in the aisles, it was like magic, basically. Because those people are complete shock. Like, they'll walk up to you, curse you out, yell at you, but when you walk away from them, they are in complete shock. Like, they are just speechless. They don't even say anything. I've done it twice, and both times they were just in complete shock. Like, they just expect you to just sit there and just take their verbal abuse, but if you just walk away from them, they're going to be in absolute shock. And here's the thing, don't be scared if they threaten to call the manager. Don't be scared of that. If they do call the manager, or your manager complains about you, basically tell the manager, "Listen, manager, boss, I was trying my best to help them. I was doing everything in my power, but they would not stop being rude, and they still kept cursing. What do you expect me to do at that point?" Everybody has their limits. Everybody has their patience. You offered them a solution. You told them, "I'll help you if you stop being rude." They didn't take it. They decided to keep being rude. Walk away from them. And if they're at the cash register, if they're your customer at the cash register, and they're blocking it, just void the transaction and say, "I'm helping next person. I'm helping next person." And if they still refuse to move at that point, you can call the manager and have the manager deal with this and say, "You deal with it. I'm not dealing with this. I tried to help them. They're being rude. They're holding up the line. They're costing the store business. People are walking out. They're pissed at the long lines." You basically say that. And if your manager does not have your back in that situation, that is a terrible manager. That's a good way to find out if you have a good manager, is to basically see how he reacts to you being mistreated by other customers. If there are customers in the store that are mistreating you, and the manager apologizes on your behalf and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Let me take care of you," that is a shitty manager. Excuse my language. That is not a manager that you want to be with. If they instead say, you can't talk to my employees like that. Please, be rude, be professional, be nice, be courteous. Don't be rude. stuff like that. If he defends you, he or she defends you, that's a good manager. That's a manager that you want to stay with. But if they basically just take the customer side and go, why are they mad? Why aren't you doing more to please them? Stuff like that. Walk away from it. It is just not worth it. And now the scammers. The scammers, I'll say about this here, scammers are even worse than the rude customers. And the scammers, if you work as a cashier in retail, you're going to eventually bump into a scammer. It's going to happen. Now, what kind of scams are they running? There's all different kinds of scams. But common scams that I've seen, what happens is that they will try to return something that they've stolen. So basically, it was a lot of times in my store, it was something small, like a probiotic, like pills that they were trying to return, and they basically were trying to return these without a receipt. And they would oftentimes come in with like a store bag, like they would pretend like they took the bag from another time, but they would come in with a store bag, like thinking that was gonna make them clear, or make you think that it was not stolen. But a lot of times you can tell if it's stolen. Most of the time they're younger people in their 20s or their 30s. Their story is almost always the exact same. They say, oh, my grandmother didn't want it, my mother didn't want it. When you ask them for the day and the time that they bought it, they can never give you a clear answer. It's almost always the exact same, usually the exact same items, very expensive items and small items. So small items because they can steal them and hide them quickly, and expensive items because they're going to get a lot for them. And what they do is when you refund them basically and you give them store credit, they take that store credit and then they'll just sell it to somebody for like half off or something like that. So they'll steal like a $100 a jar of pills, for example, from like a store, like a probiotics, expensive probiotics. And then what they will do is they'll return it, they'll get $100 store credit, and then they'll sell the store credit to somebody for $75, and then they'll go shop with that store credit. That's basically how they make money. They're thieves and they're scammers. And if you work enough, you will notice these patterns really quickly. And I would just basically say is that try to stop these people, because like, I'm not saying to stop them from stealing. Don't do that. Don't confront thieves. But if you see that they are, they're trying to do a return, just deny the return. Basically just say, oh, policy is I cannot deny a return this much, and basically say, I'm going to call the manager. The manager will deal with this. And try to give the manager some kind of signal. Basically say to the manager that this is a stolen item. This is don't say directly to the manager when you're right next to a customer, but basically say, hey, boss, can you take a look at this about this transaction? Like, what do you think of this? Just say that to them, and that could really mean anything to the customer. That's how I usually dealt with it. And most supervisors, when I did that, when I called them up and I said, hey, boss, can you take a look at this transaction? Most of the supervisors, they understood exactly what I was talking about, and they understood that the item was stolen. I did have one supervisor who was a bit annoying, and he had rang up the he ended up returning the probiotics, even though I was telling him, I'm not going to do this. He ended up bringing it up, and then he asked me, he's like, Pat, what's the problem exactly? Why didn't you want to do it? And I said, that stuff was stolen. I was trying to tell you. And then he was like, oh. I'm like, so some people just don't have common sense. But basically, the reason I would try to, deny these scam transactions is because they might try to throw it on you. They basically might say, oh, why didn't you see this person was a scammer or something like that? And ultimately, in the end of the day, these people are also criminals or scammers. Again, if you ever see somebody shoplifting in a store, don't confront them. Don't do that. So if you see people stealing, don't do that. Don't confront them. It is, you're working a little bit over minimum wage. It is not worth your safety. I had a coworker of mine, a supervisor. She actually confronted a guy who stole. He pushed her into a shelf. She ended up going to the hospital, but she made a full recovery and she was fine. But I'm talking more about the scammers, the people that try to return, stolen stuff. Is just, don't do the returns, because you could actually get in trouble. But if you see somebody shoplifting, then don't confront them. Don't just leave it. Just ignore it. It's not worth you can tell your manager, I saw that person stealing, but don't confront them. Don't do that. It is not worth your safety. Now, next thing I wanted to move on to number 8, and it's when it hits closing, it's time to leave. This is continuing with the rude customers, but it's in a separate point because this happens so many times. And this is, if you work in retail, I guarantee you've seen this happen at least once. If you work on a closing shift, you've probably seen this happen once. And if you work in fast food, you've probably seen this once too. Even if you work in a restaurant, you've probably seen this once. Last-minute shoppers, last-minute diners. What these people do is they come in like 2 or 3 minutes before the store closes, and they'll expect to shop. That is what people do. And the thing is, some people do this on purpose. Now, why do some customers do this on purpose? Why do some customers come into stores like, 2 to 3 minutes before they close? The reason they're doing this on purpose is because the customers themselves know that you want to leave. They know that. And they know that you want to go home. And they know that if they keep complaining enough about something, that you will do it for them. Like give them a massive discount, apply their, fake coupon, whatever it is. So they'll want to get something. They'll say, oh, this box is like dented, like, give me like, 50% off or something like that. They'll come in 2 minutes before closing and they know that everybody wants to go home, and they'll make a scene because they know the manager will say, okay, just do it. Stuff like that. I will say this. Make sure to read your contracts a lot of times at your job, because it actually will say probably when you're supposed to be working. But here's the thing. If the manager ever gives you an attitude about coming in late, like if you come in late one day and it's not your fault, you just happen to come in late, traffic or something like that, and the manager gives you an attitude and the manager says, you are supposed to be here on time right away, stuff like that, then you are also supposed to leave on time as well. That's it. It's ridiculous to me that managers expect people to be 100% on the dot right when the store opens, but then at the same time is they expect you to stay late if something. So it's like a double standard. Is they expect you to be right on time right when your shift happens. You cannot be 1 minute late, but then they expect you to stay right after your shift ends. So that's what I'll say is that when it's closing time, when your shift is over, it is time to go. It is time to leave. That is what it is. In my store, the managers had like a stupid policy where they constantly, would tell people, oh, you can't leave until every customer, you're finished helping every single customer. And I remember once, it was the day before Easter that I was actually working. And what happened is, I was supposed to be leaving at 4 o'clock. And there was a giant rush of people that came into the store, and I was the only cashier there. And the customers were buying gift cards. They were buying stuff for Easter, a bunch of stuff. They were all, they were all shoppers on the last day, the day before the holiday. And what happened is, when I was supposed to leave at 4 o'clock, I told the manager I want to leave. The manager says you can't leave until you finish helping you finish helping everybody online. And what happens is, the one guy comes up, I ring him up. Another guy comes up, I ring him up. Another guy comes up, I ring him up. Another guy comes up, and it's like a never-ending line. It's a never-ending line. And even when I called up, other, my coworkers for backup, it was basically a never-ending line. And if somebody's supposed to go home, they should let them, finish their last transaction that they're doing, and then just leave right after that at the dot. You should not be forced to, stay until you finish every single customer, because customers are going to constantly keep coming in. And I ended up staying for 2 hours extra after my shift. That's BS. I don't want to stay for that long. I wanted to go home at 4. There was no reason for me to stay for an extra 2 hours, but the customers just kept coming and coming and coming and coming. And the supervisor saw this. She knew that I was still staying, and she did nothing. And then when I called her for backup, she helped me ring a little bit. And then what ended up happening is she said to me that when it finally hit, when it finally hit the last customer, and it was a little bit over 6 at that point, what happened was I knew it was only going to be less than a minute until another customer shows up. And I said, I'm going. That's it. I'm going home. And she said to me, fine, go, don't help. That's what she said to me. Excuse me? Like, I've been here, I was supposed to leave at 4. I've already been working for several hours. My shift was supposed to end 2 hours ago. But she was acting like I should just keep ringing up and keep staying there. I was ringing up for an extra 2 hours because nobody would help me because customers were just constantly coming up. It was ridiculous. So, I will say that to you, is that if customers are, customers are in the store and stuff like that, and they're expecting your help, especially after closing. This wasn't, that story previously wasn't during closing. It was, I was supposed to leave when the store is still open at 6, but it's a perfect example of the companies don't want you to go home until you finish helping every single customer, and I tell you, that is just ridiculous. Is some customers are going to be really demanding, they're going to take very long, and it's just not fair to you. You should not be staying that long. I remember once I had a really bad situation with last-minute shoppers, where people had, I knew that I felt like there was going to be a big rush coming in, and what I would always typically do is I would lock the door at 9:58. That is what I would do. The store would close at 10, but I would typically lock the store at 9:58. And what would happen is most customers, when they walked up to the door at 9:58 and they tried to open it and they realized it was locked, they would just leave. Most customers would. And that's how I basically prevented a lot of last-minute shoppers. I did that. My supervisors most of the time would not stop me. They would see what I was doing, that I was closing it 2 minutes beforehand. But what happened was one day, there was a guy that came in at 9:58, and by the time, he pulled on the door, it was already 9:59, and I said to him, we're closed. He was, like, banging on the door, basically the guy was, like, giving me an attitude, and what the guy does is, he holds up his phone to the door, and it says 9:59, and he's like, you're still open for another minute, you gotta let us in. And I was like, oh my god. And my supervisor was, like, standing behind me, like, kind of, like, in that hallway in the door room, and I said, like, what do you want me to do? And she was pissed. She was a friend of mine. She was a bit unhappy, but she basically said, just let him in. And it was him and, like, a few of his friends or family. They came in. It was like 4 or 5 people that came in. And the guy said, we'll only take 5 minutes. How long did the guy take? Can you guess? Over 45 minutes shopping. And we just basically had to sit there and just wait for those people to finish. And I would tell them this, is that, in that type of situation, I would tell them, you got 5 minutes exactly. You told me 5 minutes? 5 minutes exactly. I'm going home. If you are not done after 5 minutes, I'm going home. That is basically it. So when closing hits, it is time to go home. When your shift ends, it is time to go home. Do not make you stay late. That is ridiculous. And here's the thing is, if you have a supervisor or a manager that is basically saying to you, oh, help the customers, help them, the rest of the people in the store, say, no, my shift ends at closing time. You want to help them? You go ahead, be my guest. A lot of times the supervisor or the managers, what they would do is they would just sit in the office and they would do nothing. They would just sit in the office playing on their phones while you would be basically running around the store and helping these customers. So that's what I would say is, when your shift ends, when it is closing time, you're going home. And if the customers complain, you tell them, I'm sorry, sir or ma'am, but it's after closing. I have responsibilities. I have things to do. I have to get up in the morning. I have college. I've got to go do another shift, whatever else, stuff like that. I got my own personal, things to deal with. You came in, you came in after closing. We were nice to you. We gave you a few minutes, but you're taking too long at that point. That's what I would say. And that's not being unreasonable. And if that person complains to corporate or they make a complaint, let them complain. That's basically what I would have done. And if the corporate complained to me and they gave me an attitude, it's like, hey, what about my time? I'm supposed to go home at 10. You're caring that a customer's complaining that I told them that they have to hurry up when they're coming in, 1 minute before closing and they're already there. If they're already in the store after 10 o'clock when it's closing, you could technically kick them out because that's a trespass at that point because the store is supposed to be closed. But most companies don't do that. Most companies will just let them, shop to their heart's content all night long and just make you stay there. And then you have to go in the morning to, morning shift the next day. It's ridiculous. So that's what I would say. And if the manager complains, say to them, you want to help the customers? Go ahead. I'm going home. I'm leaving. Now, number 7, what I would say is don't go above and beyond. Now, I know some people might say, huh? You're telling us to be lazy? No, I'm not telling you to be lazy. I want to be clear on that. What I'm just saying is just do your job description. So, again, about your contract, read what your employment contract is because most people are not going to don't read their employment contracts, but read exactly what your job description is and what your job responsibilities are because there are going to be lazy supervisors that are going to try to put tasks on you that are not your responsibility. They are not your job. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. I talked about this in my, other retail video, but I'm just going to go over it really quick. Not going to take too long on this, but there was a supervisor of mine that I used to work with him on Saturday nights. And Saturday nights was sale signs. Sale signs would change for the weekend, and I would have to go through the store, and I had hundreds of signs. Now, if I was not disturbed that entire night, I could do the entire store in one night. I was very quick with those signs. I was very quick taking them down, putting them up. I could literally get the entire store done in one night if nobody disturbed me. That's if nobody disturbs me. What this supervisor did was he routinely tried to sabotage me. He routinely would try to, prevent me from doing my signs. And the reason he did that was because when the store would hit 10 o'clock, he would basically say to me, Patrick, now because you didn't do your work, you can't leave until you finish all your work. So he would basically do that on purpose just to basically get extra hours for himself, just to basically milk overtime. That is what he would do. He would just do that on purpose. And then what he would do is he would just go in the office and he would just sit there. He would sit there on his phone and just not do anything. And when I would ask him to come down and help me with the signs, he would say, oh, no, I got some more paperwork to do. That is what he would constantly do over and over and over again. So I would tell you is that if they try to get you to do something that is not yours, like that supervisor, for example, what he had me do is he had me do price changes a lot of times. He would give me like the little symbol device, and he would make me go down the aisles and do price changes. I'm not supposed to do price changes. I'm supposed to do sale signs. There's a difference. Sale signs just the tags that the signs that you stick on the shelf. When your price changes are actually the actual piece of paper that you actually take out and you actually put it in. So you're supposed to scan it. See if the price has changed, print out a new one, put it in, stuff like that. It takes way too long. Most of the time that's on the supervisors, that is not on the job of the store associates. I would say no. I'm supposed to be doing sales signs. I'm not supposed to be doing stuff like this. I would say don't do somebody else's work. Only do your responsibilities. Only do your job description. And I will say this too is my dad told me, he told me a really famous line. I remember he said to me, the guy that works the hardest, they are going to expect everything from him. That is it, with no extra reward. And that is true. Think about that. In most jobs, if you are the hardest worker, do you get rewarded? More than your other coworkers? Most times, no, I would say. Maybe there's other bosses out there that treat you differently, but I went above and beyond so many times. I worked really hard. I stayed late. I stayed late with these annoying customers that would take so long. I would do all my tasks and extra. More than that, I would clean, I would make the store perfect, I would do everything extra. Even if I finished all my tasks, I would find something extra to do. I would go above and beyond. And then what happened? Did I get some kind of reward? No. A lot of times I would get junk. It was just, it was just like once a year, maybe I would get like a 20-cent raise, stuff like that. That's not a reward. You should give me something else. One time the manager told me that I'm going to get these reward points. We got these reward points for being employee of the month, and we could redeem them on the company website. And the points that I had were enough for a $5 gift card, and I couldn't even get $5 in cash. So that's what I got for basically going above and beyond, is I got that. That's what I got, more work. And my supervisor, my assistant manager, do you know what she would say to me? She would say to me, "Oh, Patrick, you're my go-to guy. Whenever I need somebody to come in, I'm always going to call you." It's like, oh yeah, wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. You are not going to call anybody else. You are only going to call me and constantly bother me and expect me to come in. I didn't say that to her, but that's basically what I was thinking in my mind. It was that. So if you are the guy who's doing the most work, they are always going to expect the most of you, and they're going to get on your case. If something is not working out that day, they're going to find something that, criticize you on, freak out on you. But the lazy people, the people that don't really do their jobs, they don't really go after them. They don't go after them as much. They know those people are lazy, and so they don't give them crap. But they know the person that works hard, they're going to give you crap. It was like I used to collect emails. We had a program at my company where customers could give us their email, and they would get like coupons and other offers, and they would get a 20% off. And the management wanted us to really, push customers to sign up for that email program. And I had more email signups than anybody else. Like I did triple or quadruple more than anybody else. My trick, what I did to get people to sign up for emails is they would get a 20% coupon. So if they had a bunch of items together, I would tell them, hey, pay for this one item, the cheapest item, and then, give me your email. You sign up for the email program, and then I can just apply the 20%, coupon to the rest of the stuff right here, and you get 20% off. And that's what I would do. And the customers were like, oh, yeah, that works. And I did that for them, and I convinced so many people to sign up for the email program. And the manager kept saying to me, oh, Patrick, you're doing a great job. You're employee of the month. I'm gonna do something for you. And then what did I get? I got that $5 gift card. And I will say this, at that point, I stopped collecting emails. I would say to customers, do you want to sign up for the email program? And they would say no. I wouldn't tell them about the 20% after that. I didn't push it, and I would just, let it go. And at that point, when my emails dropped, management got on my case, and Patrick, your emails are down. You got to start, getting more. But I still had more than everybody else, despite that. So basically, they're going to expect more from the person that works the hardest. So I would say don't go above and beyond, because you're not going to get rewarded for it. You're not. It's not going to happen. So only do your job description. I'm not telling people to be lazy. I'm not telling you to be slack off. I know people are going to say in the comments, professionals telling me to be lazy. No, I'm not. I'm just saying is do your job description. There's no reason to go above and beyond. You're working a little bit of a minimum wage job. It's not, worth it. You're not going to get this big reward for your manager, for this. And all they're going to expect from you is more work. And moving on to number 6 is don't take the supervisor promotion. So this is it. I decided to add this in here because I know people are going to bring this up. Is that, they say, if you work hard, you get promoted. We're talking about retail. In other places, if you get promoted in other jobs, typically it's a better thing. If you get promoted in other jobs, typically it is a good thing. In retail, if you get promoted, it's more like a punishment. And you're probably thinking, how? Why shouldn't I take the promotion? So let's say that you've been, what I like to call this is I like to call this a promotion scam. The promotion scam is very common. I have seen this happen multiple times. People, they have tried to trick me into this scam, but I never fell for it. However, though, I know other people who did fall for it and they regretted it. But basically what will happen is you are working at a retail place. You are working there for a couple months. And after a couple months, what they will do is they will basically say to you, Patrick, or, whoever your name is, you're doing a great job. How about I promote you to supervisor? Would you like that? And what happens is most people jump on this opportunity. Oh, I get a promotion? I've been working here only a couple months. I get a promotion. And here's the problem with that. The reason that this is a scam is because when people get promoted, the only thing they're thinking about is they're thinking about the bump in pay, but they're not thinking about the extra responsibilities that they're going to have. So they think in their minds a lot of times that they're going to get an extra pay, but with less responsibilities. And in most cases, that is true. When you get a supervisor position, you do get more responsibilities. However, there's a difference. In most other places, when you get some extra responsibilities, but you get much better pay. In retail, that doesn't happen. In retail, you get much more work, but barely any extra pay. Most supervisor positions that I've seen, they pay you less than $1 extra from your current wage. So if you are let's say that you are making, $11 an hour, just theoretically, and they want to promote you to supervisor, they'll offer to give you $12 an hour now. So they'll give you, or they might even give you like 75 cents. Sometimes not even the full dollar. So it's around that. And what are they going to expect you to do? They're going to expect you to do price changes. They're going to expect you to be in charge of the stock room. They're going to expect you to address customer complaints directly. They're going to expect you to open and close the store. They're going to expect you to work on truck nights, unloading the heavy truck, dealing with the truck driver, managing the entire store's cargo that night. They're going to expect you to run the whole store as the boss when the boss is away. And so imagine that you're running a really large store you're the supervisor of that store, you're running a really large store, and you're making only $1 more than the associates, and you have just so much more responsibilities. And on top of that, you have to count all the money in the safe. So you have to bring up the cash registers, count them all up, stuff like that. There's a lot of responsibilities that and not only that, you're also responsible for a lot of the tasks the associates are responsible for. So that's why I call it a scam. The reason it's a scam is because the reason that these companies are so desperate to promote you is because they want to throw all this extra stuff on you with barely an increase in pay. Barely an increase. So if this situation happens to you, if you start working for and after only a couple months working in retail, they basically say to you, hey, I want to promote you. The manager says that to you. First thing you ask the manager, how much more will my pay be? How much more will it be? And then you ask the manager, what is my responsibilities going to be? And I want this written. I want this in writing, what my responsibilities are going to be. I want this writing in an email listing what my responsibilities are going to be, because they can basically lie about that if they tell you verbally, oh, it's not going to be that much extra work. No, you tell them, I want this in writing. I want this in an email. I want this in writing. I want you to tell me exactly what my responsibilities are going to be. And if they tell you $1 an hour extra, say, no, that's it, no. And if they say why, you don't have to give them a reason why. Just say, no, I don't want it. I don't want the promotion. They cannot force you into a promotion. They can't do that. So if you don't accept it, they can. But once you accept the promotion, you can never go back down. They were never going to do that. They're never going to promote you back down to associate or demote you back down to associate. And I've seen people go through this. People get excited to be supervisor, and then they get all this extra work thrown on them, and then they quit after just a couple months because they cannot handle it. So I've seen this happen to people, and the management at my store, they were getting frustrated. They were getting angry because I had worked there for 6 years, and they were constantly trying to promote me. They constantly kept asking me, hey, we'll promote you to supervisor. How much more increase in it? $1. Nope, that's it. No, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. They never asked me really why I wasn't taking the promotion, but I just said, no, thank you. I don't want it. That was it. I think they probably figured it out because I saw the pay. But if you're going to promote me to supervisor and you're going to demand all these extra tasks and all this extra stuff on top of that, then literally, no. You're going to give me at a minimum $5 more an hour. You are not giving me $1 more an hour and expect 3 times the work. I'm not doing that crap for you. So that's what I'm saying. And that's why I would always a lot of times say, I know this might sound kind of crazy, but when you really think about it, sometimes retail places are like communism in a way, because it's like almost everybody's basically making the exact same wage except the manager. So like everybody's making the exact same wage, and even if you get promoted, you barely get an increase in it. So it's like, what's the point of working hard if you don't get really rewarded for it? So that's what I would say about that is unless they're gonna offer you like a really good raise increase, don't take the supervisor promotion because you are gonna regret it. Number 5. Moving on to number 5 is do not come in on your days off. Do not come in on your days off. Now, what I mean by this is if you work in retail, anybody's working in retail or working in fast food, you know exactly what I'm talking about in this situation. Is there are going to be managers that are going to call you, they're going to text you, they're going to say to you, hey, can you come in? Come in, please. Come in. This person called out. This person did not, show up to work. And I will tell you, a lot of times I felt guilty. I don't know why. I guess maybe I was too good of a person. Maybe I'm too nice. But I did feel guilty. So, like, even though if it wasn't my responsibility, somebody decided not to show up to work and they would say to me, hey, please, can you come in and stuff like that? I still ended up coming in because I felt guilty. I felt like, they needed me. And so I would come in. But you are not responsible to come in on your days off. Don't feel like that. And here's the thing is, what I did was every single time manager needed me, I would come in. Every single time. And because of that, the assistant manager would only ask me. They wouldn't ask anybody else. They would only call me. So anytime somebody did not show up to work, they did not come in, we had, man down. What would happen is they would constantly call me. I was the first person they would constantly ask, and then I ended up coming in, and working on those days. And I was hoping that they would recognize this. I was hoping that they would recognize my hard work and that I would get a really good raise. What did I get? 25-cent raise. So, and that's once a year, and so that, I regret that. I don't want to do that stuff. And I know some people are going to say to me, professional, what's the problem? You get more hours. No, you don't. You don't get more hours. That's what people don't understand. You think that you get more hours, but you don't get more hours. What basically happens is, whenever I covered all those extra days off, like days that I was not supposed to be working, but somebody did not show up to work, whenever I had situations like that happen, right? What would happen is if I worked those extra days, if I looked at my schedule, they would just cut 2 or 3 hours from each of my shifts on days that I was supposed to be working. And they would do that on purpose, specifically so that they did not have to pay me overtime. So they would never let me go over overtime. The supervisors went over overtime when they wanted, but they would not let me go over overtime. So that's what basically happened. I never had overtime once. Not once in these situations. So I worked so many times, so many days, different days, and a lot of times this would happen. They would ask me to come in, and then I would come in, and you think that you're getting more hours, you think that you're getting more money, but reality, you're not. What's the point of coming in on an extra day when they're just going to cut hours from like another shift that you're working? And now what you're having is you're having your schedule be disrupted. So your schedule is disrupted. You're supposed to be doing something on that day. I remember one time when I first started working in the first year, the really scummy manager that I had, the first guy, I was working, in that week, I was working like 5 or 6 days straight in that week. And I was working like, 6 or 7 hour shifts. Now, what happened is, when I was working those shifts, I ended up working, I think it was like 4 days in a row. And then the next 2 or 3 days after that, the manager kept constantly telling me, oh, this person didn't show up to work. I need you to come in. And it was never, Pat, can you please come in? I really need your help. It was never that. It was always, Pat, I need you to come in. Patrick, I need you to come in right now. Stuff like that. And I ended up coming in. I worked an extra 3 days on top of that. And I wasn't able to see my friends because my friends and me were supposed to hang out with each other, but I wasn't able to see my friends because somebody kept constantly calling out of work and not coming into work. And then what happened was, after I worked like 6 or 7 days straight, the manager calls me again and tells me, Patrick, I need you to come in. And at that point, I'm already hanging out at my friend's house. And I'm like, I'm hanging out with my friends. And my manager says to me, oh, just cancel it. I need you to come into work right now. It's like, no. It's like, I made plans with my friends to come in. I already worked like 6 or 7 days straight for you. I want to have some time off at this point. I want to have a full day off. I made plans to hang out with my friends. And it's one of the few times I did stand up for myself. Most of the time I didn't stand up for myself, but this is one of the few times I did. And the manager says to me, you're not coming in. I said, no, I can't come in today. I'm hanging out with my friends. And then he just says to me, you suck, and just hung up on me on the phone. I didn't get written up or anything for that, but that was just it. Like, just be talked to like that. You would think this guy, after he helped you out with so many other shifts, you would think you'd be thanking him, but just insult him after he just can't come in for you for one shift. And the thing that really pissed me off about this, what really pissed me off, what really made me mad about this, really made me angry, is that the people that would constantly come in, because when you work in these places, you're going to notice the lazy people. You're going to figure out who the lazy people are really quickly. There are people who don't come in. They don't show up to work. Like, they just call out routinely. The manager doesn't go after them. The manager doesn't scream at them, doesn't, give them an attitude. But then they will go after you, and they'll give you an attitude to come in when they're on a day that you were not supposed to be working. And there was this one girl that I remember with this one girl that I worked with. She was a cashier. And oh my god, the amount of times that she would call out, it was ridiculous. It was like literally like, 2 call outs at least in a month. It was like constantly. Sometimes it was even 3 or 4. But it was almost like every week or every other week there was a call out. Like, she would just say, oh, I can't come in. And it will always, of course, the manager would contact me, ask me to come in, and sometimes the other manager that I had, sometimes they would guilt trip me. The supervisors would guilt trip me. They say, please, can you come in? Or we're going to be behind, stuff like that. And I would end up, okay, fine, I'll come in. And one time at that point, I remember, I thought that I was going to have a day to relax, and I get contacted by my manager. And my manager says, oh, this girl didn't come in again. And I told my manager, that was one of the points I got really pissed. And I said to my manager, I can come in, but I'm going to come in 30 minutes before this shift, and I want to talk to you in the office. And my manager says, about what? And I said, I'm going to talk to you in the office, just want to talk to you. I go in the office of my manager, and I talk to him. And I say to him, you know how many times I've covered for this girl? And, you're constantly calling me, even on days that I don't have off. And I asked him, is there a punishment for this? Is there like a punishment for this person not coming in on, so many days, like constantly calling out? Because if I did something like this, I'd get yelled at. I know that. I'd get written up. But there was no punishment for this. And I told the manager, and the manager kept dodging the point. Like, when I kept bringing it up about this girl, like constantly calling out, he would basically say, oh, Pat, she has other responsibilities. She goes to school. She also works a second job at a bank, saying stuff like that, that to me, all this stuff. And I would say to him, is there a punishment for not calling out, for calling out constantly? If you have a schedule set in stone and that person is not coming in on that day, is there a punishment? And then he says to me, there's no punishment. And then I say to him, you can't do something like this. I have responsibilities too. What makes you think she has responsibilities? She goes to school. I go to school too. I have responsibilities. So why am I constantly having to get disturbed? And I have my schedule messed up, but she can just call out whenever she feels like it. And you know what he says to me? He says to me, what do you expect me to do, Patrick? Fire her? That's what he says to me. And I said to him, no, I don't want you to fire her. I don't want to fire anyone. Just tell her that you cannot do this. You cannot constantly call out. And the thing about this is her call outs were not like, it wasn't like her schedule getting changed the day beforehand like I was talking about. Her call outs were always like, the schedule was like written like 2 weeks in advance. And she would then call out the day beforehand. So 2 weeks in advance, she knew her schedule and then call out the day before. She did this repeatedly, multiple times, and it got so ridiculous that me and my friend, we were constantly joking about it, because we were working on shifts with that girl, and what would happen is a lot of times she would not she was late, and I would say, oh, she's probably calling out again, and then what would happen is, like, 10 minutes later the phone would ring, oh, I'm calling out, I can't come into work today, and then we would just joke about it, because she was constantly doing it over and over and over again. She did not have, it's not like she had like a child or something like that. She had another job at a bank, and she also went to college, but I went to college too, and I had other things to do, and at that point I was also running my YouTube channel. So I was running my YouTube channel, working on projects, and also going to college. So why is it okay for me to have my time wasted, and and she has responsibilities, but I'm not allowed to have responsibilities? So that's basically what I would say about that. Is I just got very frustrated about that. I just got really annoyed about that. And you are not responsible. So basically what I would say is, you are not responsible for other coworkers coming in. You should not be coming in on days off because you don't get any extra hours. And if they try to basically guilt trip you, say, it's not my responsibility. If you're going to get pissed at somebody, get pissed at the person who didn't come in. Don't get pissed at me. Don't give me an attitude. I was not supposed to be working this day, but that's basically what it is. They'll try to constantly guilt trip you, get you to come in on days that you're not supposed to come in. And again, you don't get extra hours. They're just going to cut it from your other days. Now, next point I want to move on to is number 4. Are coworkers your friends? So this is something that people debate about extremely, and I know this point, most of the points that I've said, I know people are pretty supportive of me on, but this point, I know probably it's going to be like 50-50 people in the comments on this one. But what I'll say about this point here is, are coworkers your friends? My answer to this, it depends. That is what my answer is. Now, I know some people will say coworkers are not your friends. They are not. I would say it depends. There are people that I 100% knew they were my friend. 100%. I trusted them. I would tell them things that I would not tell other people, like, people that were pissing me off, for example, and stuff like that, people that I had a problem with. But, like, and they never gossiped and stuff like that. They never talked behind my back or something like that. So I pissed at the manager. I talked to my friend about it at work and would never tell him, and he would tell me also things about, like, things that he's, getting pissed off and annoyed about too, and stuff like that. So, like, there are people that I've known that are 100% my friends, but then there are people who are not your friends, and they will rat you out, and they will, talk behind your back. They will, talk crap. And also, it's not like I was spreading rumors or anything like that. I want to make that clear. I wasn't doing stuff like that. I would just basically, talk to my friend, and I would basically say, like, for example, like, I'm getting really annoyed with this manager. It's like, my raise was crap, and then my friend would tell me, yeah, my raise was crap too. We basically talk like that. So it's not like we're spreading rumors about people. We weren't doing that. But we basically, stuff like this, conversations like this, would typically, get you in trouble and stuff like that. But there are people that I knew that I will tell you 100% of my friends. And one of my best friends that I knew in real life and went to school with, I got him a job there, and he was my friend. So it's like, is he stop being my friend because he's now my coworker? No. And there are these 2 people that I knew, a guy and a girl. They were both supervisors. They ended up getting married, and they actually were some of my best friends there. And they actually even invited me to their wedding. I went to their wedding about 2 years ago. And so they were my friends. They always supported me. And even, they found out about my YouTube channel, and they come by the YouTube channel even now. They might even see this video. And they were very supportive. They were always very kind. They were like, I'm really happy for you, Pat, that this worked out. That, you're not in retail anymore, and, stuff like that. And they're not in retail also. They've moved on to other things. But like I said, they were my friends. And it really depends on what coworker. If you work with people enough, you can figure out who's your friend and who's not. You can figure that out pretty quickly. There was this one guy that I worked with. I know I mentioned this earlier on another video, but this one guy that I worked with, he was very rude, very nasty, very demanding. What this one guy would do is, when we worked on night shifts, we had a tradition. And the tradition that we had on night shifts is, when we were unloading the truck, so it was like the truck night, is that typically somebody would bring in food for everybody. So like 1 week, I would bring in food for everybody. And if you didn't, cook food, you would just, order food. A lot of times I ordered pizza because I don't know how to cook that well. But 1 week, one person would order food or make food. And then the next week, the next person would order and make food for everybody. And that was like a tradition, and we would constantly rotate. And the thing is, if you don't want to participate in this, you don't have to. You don't have to, bring in food if you don't want to. However, though, if you're not going to bring in food, you have no right to then take some of that food that people bring in. If you're not ever bringing in food, you don't have the right. And what would happen is, this guy would constantly eat pizza that we paid for. He would constantly eat burgers that were brought in. One of my friends, his wife owned a food stand, and he would bring in steak sandwiches for us too. And he would constantly eat the steak sandwiches too. But that guy, in the 6 years that I've worked with him, 6 years, never, not once would bring in food for me, ever. And then he would constantly eat the food people brought in. And it was really annoying. It was really frustrating. I think somebody should have, said something to him earlier. But what happened was, eventually, it got into a boiling point. And there was other things. It wasn't just that. It was just him being nasty. He had an attitude problem. He had an attitude problem. He was always rude, always, always in a bad mood, just always nasty to us. This wasn't a supervisor. He was another store associate, but always causing, problems. And always, like, whenever you just worked with this guy, it was like your emotions just drained to the ground. Because it was just like, he would kill your mood. It was just like not a nice guy to work with. He would just kill your mood. It's like you could be the happiest person. You go into a shift with this guy, and then you come home, and you're miserable because it's just how rude and nasty the guy is. Whole night complaining, insulting you, and then eating food that people bring in. And whenever this guy would buy food for himself, whenever he would he bought the same thing. I remember he would buy on his breaks. He would typically buy a Hershey's chocolate bar and a Coke. And he would always, whenever he takes out his wallet, he has like this giant stack of cash in it. So it's not like he doesn't have money. But he never paid for food for anybody else, but he would constantly, eat food that other people brought in. And we said crap to him. We told him stop, and he kept doing it. And we got pissed. And what ended up happening is, my friend and me, we talked to the manager about it. Because we were at our breaking point. It wasn't just the food, it was him being rude all night. Like, we couldn't handle this. Like, if I'm going to work a night shift, like, unload this huge heavy truck, I shouldn't be dealing with this emotional abuse all night long. I shouldn't be dealing with this crap. And the manager, agrees with us. He tries to talk to him, and then he says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be rude anymore. And then 1 week later, he starts being rude again and eating the food. And this went on and on. And then one day, I remember, I complained to the manager, and then the guy, the really, greedy guy who never, buys us food and constantly eats other people's food, he basically says, "Oh, I'll buy you I'll buy you Pat and your friend drinks." My other friend that was working with us, the guy who makes the steak sandwiches, his wife runs the food stand. And I remember I got a Nesquik strawberry drink shake, and I remember my friend, what did he get? I think he got an Arizona. That's what I think he got. And I said to the guy that was ringing us up, I said to him, "Hey, this is the first time that you've actually done something nice. You've actually bought something for us." And you know what he says to me? He says to me, that, "Oh, no, I didn't pay for this. The manager gave me $20 and told me to, buy you guys drinks and food." That's what, and I was like, so, like, the guy was so rude, he couldn't even keep up the act. So, like, the reason that the manager gave him money is the manager was basically trying to make it seem like we had worked things out and he was going to be nice from now on. But the way the manager handled the situation was just horrible. And he even admitted to it that manager gave him, money for that, and then the manager denied it. He said, "Oh, no, I didn't give him money so that he would you would think that he changed. I only gave him money because it was my turn to buy food for everybody that week. It was not his turn to buy everybody food that week." But that was a really bad thing the manager did, and I was pissed. And my friend, he got pissed. He said, "Pat, I'm done." He walked out. He quit. He ended up working at the same company but another store, but he never worked there again. That was it. He was done. And that's what I would say is that somebody like that, like the guy who's constantly eating your food, that person will never be your friend, ever. But then you have other, coworkers that you're working with that are your friends, that are going to, help you out. They'll talk to you about things they don't trust other people with. They will, whenever you need help with something, they'll come help you, and you help them whenever they need help with something like that. That's basically how it works. That's how friends treat each other. So, yes, you can make friends with coworkers, but it highly depends. There are some people that are selfish. They're only out for themselves. But then there are other people that they will become your friends. They'll like you, and they'll treat you with respect. That's what I'll basically say about it. And now number 3, moving on to the next thing here. Next thing I'll say is, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Don't be afraid. This goes into like a lot of the other things that I was talking about, but there are bad situations that you're going to deal with. And I'm not talking about the customers here in this regard. I'm talking about management specifically. Management is rude to you. Management is causing you crap. Don't think that the management is like a dictatorship or something like that. It's like, you have free speech at the end of the day. You can say whatever you want. Sure, you might get fired. You might get written up or something like that. But retail is not a job that you want to stay in, your entire life. I know some people might need the job, they might need it at the moment, but in most cases, most people that work in retail, they don't really need the job. They're working in the job to try to, help pay off college at the time, maybe get some extra spending money, stuff like that. It's not a job that, you're gonna build a career out of, so, like, don't think that. But I always felt like that. I felt like, I was, like, I needed to be here. Like, I felt like this was the one thing that I knew how to do, and I knew how to do it well. And so because of that, even if I had really nasty managers, people that would, talk crap to me, I didn't know how to stand up for myself. I didn't know, how to, talk back to these people. I'm not saying to like curse them out and stuff like that, but I'm basically saying is that if you have like a really ridiculous manager, say something back to them. Say, hey, you can't treat me like that. I go above and beyond for you. I do whatever for you, and I just not deserve to be treated like this. I deserve to be treated with respect. And if they threaten to write you up, let them write you up. That's basically what I'll say about it. I don't want to get anybody fired from their job, but that's basically what I would have done. And my mom and dad, they could tell that I was stressed. They could tell that I was hurt. And my mom and dad would constantly say the exact same thing to me. They would say to me all the time, it's like, son, you don't have to work there. We're still working. We have money. We can take care of you. You can find another job in the meantime. It's not like you're gonna be homeless. You can come back, live at home. Stuff like that. I wasn't living by myself. By what I mean, I was living with my parents still when I was working in retail. But what they meant is they weren't gonna throw me out and stuff like that. And that's my parents were saying that. But I was saying no. I really want to work there. This is what I know how to do. And so my parents told me to quit several times. They saw that I was taking a toll on my mental health, but I didn't listen to my parents. I should have listened to my parents. But I will tell you, one of the things that, made me such a weak state, one of the things that really hurt me emotionally, like I was in a really bad mental state, was because when I first applied to that retail place, everybody was so nice to me when I was applying. The managers and the supervisors, everybody was so kind. But it was all just a facade. It was all fake. When I actually started working there, I saw their true faces, like really nasty people, really rude people. Like the manager was a complete scumbag. He would never help. He would just get on your case and he would say, oh, because you're not doing your job, I'm not going to get my yearly bonus. Oh yeah, that's definitely great encouragement for your workers. But constantly give me an attitude, and the same manager that I told you guys about that would, yell at me and say it's my responsibility when the schedule is changed to find out about it. Just attitude, rude, never helping, sit in the office a lot of times on his phone, just managing his lumber business, did not care about his employees at all, did not care about the well-being of them, just overall scumbag. And whenever I needed help with something, whenever I needed to learn how to do something, they would scream at me. They screamed at me. And because they would say, oh, I can't help you right now, blah, 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 this. And I got so scared of asking them for help to teach me how to do certain things, so they would constantly scream. I had to figure out how to do things on my own. Like, for example, one of the things I figured out how to do on my own was returns. No one taught me how to do returns in the cash register. I was scrolling through the different buttons, and I was figuring out, and I was just like, hit a return, and I saw what the extra options were on there, and I eventually figured it out. So, like, that was one of the things. Like, people I remember there was, like, a cashier that trained me how to work on the register for, like, a few hours on my first day, but then she left me, all alone. And the supervisors, they were just really nasty, would constantly scream at me, and that's one of the reasons I didn't quit, is because I was scared. I eventually figured out how to do everything, and I knew how to do it well. I was good at it, even though I was making crap pay at that job. And I was scared that if I went to go work for somewhere else, the exact same cycle was going to repeat. That I was going to have really rude, nasty people that were going to scream at the top of their lungs at me, curse me out, treat me like crap, whenever I asked for help and stuff like that. And that destroyed me, because it really prevented me from leaving that job. Because I remember one of my friends, he's into psychology. He studies psychology. He's really good at psychology. And I actually talked to him about this. And he said to me, that's not normal. People are not supposed to scream at you. Like, that doesn't happen at every job. That's not normal. That is, people don't do stuff like that normally. That was like a rare occasion, but he told me that I shouldn't let that affect me and be scared to, like, work at other places, because that's not normal. That normally doesn't happen, where people will scream at you and curse you out if you ask them for help. But that was like, he's like, that's not normal. Those people had issues there. They were rude and nasty, but that's what he said. I wish I would have, told him about that earlier, but I guess that was on me for not telling him about how I felt about my job earlier. But that's it. It's like, that's what I learned, is that not every single person is like that at a job. Not every single person is this rude and nasty person, and that's why I was so scared to quit. I was so scared to find another place to work, because I was scared the exact same cycle was going to repeat, where I was going to have to learn everything all on my own. Nobody was going to train me, and they were going to leave me by myself. And then whenever I asked for help, they would just scream at me and curse me out and stuff like that. And I didn't want to deal with that. I remember the worst case of this happening, and it's one of the few times I did stand up for myself. There was a supervisor that, if you ever asked her for help, she would just say, "Don't you see I'm in the middle of doing something?" That's what she would always say every single time. But then, when you were in the middle of doing something and she called you, oh, you could not say that. You had to help her. You had to go up there and you had to help her. And we had a photo machine. And the photo machine, people could, print their photos, edit photos. We could take passport photos, stuff like that. And customers would constantly ask me for help with this photo machine. Constantly for help. And I didn't know how to use it, because nobody taught me how to use the photo machine. Nobody had taught me how to edit their pictures, how to, check them out and stuff like that. And take their passport photos, edit their passport photos, put that together. editing their photos was easy enough, but the passport photos, doing that was a little bit harder. And about this is these, whenever I asked the supervisor for help, she would say, I can't help you right now. Ask somebody else. I will help you later. I'll help you tomorrow. I'll help you next week. It never came. I'm busy right now. I'll help you next time. I'll teach you next time how to do it. And I would have to call other coworkers of mine to do it for me because I didn't know how to do it. And what happened is months have passed. Months went on. And this exact same thing kept happening where she would say the exact same thing over and over again. She would say to me, oh, I cannot help you right now. Find somebody else. And customers were getting frustrated too. Customers were getting annoyed by this. And they were walking out. Sometimes there wasn't anybody to help them. And what ended up happening is one day there was a customer that, wanted a passport photo. And I called up that same supervisor who would constantly tell me over and over again. She would say to me, I can help you tomorrow. I'll teach you another day. And she never did. And she says, take the passport photo. I say, I can't. And she says, why? I said, I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to make passport photos on the computer. I don't know how to do it. And you know what she says to me? She says to me, you've been working for half a year here, and you don't know how to do passport photos? She's like, are you stupid or something? And I said to her, no, I don't know how to do passport photos. You haven't taught me. And I literally said that to her. I said, you never taught me. And she says to me, well, you're going to learn today. That's what she says. And she just rushes me through that. And I should have been more aggressive. I should have yelled at her back. I said, well, you never taught me. That's what I said. But I should have yelled at her. I should have said, no, this is BS right now. This is not how you treat me. I asked you for help repeatedly, and you never want to help me, and now you're giving me an attitude for this crap. Literally, I should have just stood up for myself. I should have, put my foot down and said, no, I'm not going to tolerate this. And if she, given me attitude, I would have walked out. I should have just done that at that point. I hated working with that supervisor. I hated working with her. Whenever I would come into work, she said, if you ask me for any help today, I'm going to send you home. That's what she would say to me whenever I would walk in on a shift. I hated working with her. She was really rude. One time I was working with another coworker of mine, and there was the coupon machine was out of paper, and the customers were complaining about it, and we had a long line. I asked the same supervisor for help. I called her up on the phone. She was sitting in the office, probably sitting on her phone doing nothing, and I say to her, coupon machine's out of paper. Before she could even let me finish, she says to me, are you so effing stupid? You people are incompetent at doing anything right? That's what she said to me, and she just hung up. And then she later said, yo, I'm sorry for being rude, Patrick. She said that to me later that day. I said to her, it's fine. But I literally should have said, no, that's not. I should have said, no, it's not fine. You can't treat people like that. And then the next week, she would just curse me out again. So that's what I would say about her is I could not stand her. If you want to know, eventually she got fired for stealing. She did because her stupid friend would constantly come into work. And whenever a stupid friend would come in, she would constantly do a large transaction, like $200, and she would always round that stuff down to like $5. And she would only ring up that customer. She ended up getting fired for that. She ended up crying. When she got fired that day, I remember that day when she got fired because what happened was she said to me, there's some corporate big shots in the store today. Be on your best behavior. Just pointing to me like that. And then she ended up getting taken to the office, but the corporate big shots were there for her. She got fired. She was crying her eyes out, ran out the back door. And, I don't want to sound like a psychopath when I say this, but that's one of the few times in my life I actually took pleasure in somebody suffering. I actually took pleasure in watching somebody, suffer. Like losing her job and just crying her eyes out. It was one of the few times I was actually happy. I was actually really happy at her being sad, happy at her being miserable. Because that supervisor treated me so badly over the years. Just cursing me out so many times, verbally abusing me so many times, treating me like garbage. And so to see her in just tears like that, like I said, I don't want to sound like a psycho or something, but I was actually happy to see her, cry and just be so upset because it was just like, I'm normally a very nice person to people, but that was just it. It was like, I was just tired of that BS. I was tired of being treated like that. And I was actually happy they threw her out of work. But she never got fired because of her rude attitude. She never got fired for that. So I'm saying is, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Don't be afraid of that. Stand up for yourself. Don't let these people, walk all over you. Say something back to them. Say, hey, you can't treat me like this. It doesn't matter if they're a manager. It doesn't matter if they're the district manager. It does not matter who they are. It doesn't matter if they're the CEO of the company. Is that if they're gonna treat you like crap like this, you did nothing wrong and they're still treating you like crap. They're cursing you out. And even if you did something wrong, if somebody does something wrong, usually tell them, hey, you made a mistake here. Here's how you can improve. You give them constructive criticism. You don't curse them out. You don't give them an attitude. You don't do stuff like this. It's not normal. You don't do crap like that. It's not a nice thing to do. I remember we had a district manager, and the district manager, what he would do is he walked into the store and he would do an inspection really quick. And he would basically, he walked around the store and he would meet us on the sales floor where all the customers were. And he would say to us in front of the customers, the store looks like great, guys. You guys are doing an awesome job. You guys are doing amazing. Keep it up. And then he would go back to his office, and an hour later, supervisors would get this long email of just him cursing us out, basically saying, you guys don't know what the F you're doing. You guys better get your crap together or you're getting effing fired. That's how he would talk to people. And I cannot believe this guy's a district manager and he talked to people like that. And I remember when I was at a company meeting with him, we sat in the stock room, I guess it was called a company meeting. We sit at the stock room, And when we sit in the stock room, he basically brings up a chart showing us our sales going down. And then at the same time, he says that the neighboring supermarkets, because our store was like a retail store. We had like electronics, a few other things. We had some groceries, but we had a supermarket that was right next door to us. What he did was he basically said that supermarket is getting more activity and our sales are going down. Our sales are dropping. And he basically kept acting like it was our fault. He basically kept saying, oh, you guys are not being helpful to customers. We were very helpful to customers. I was doing at least my best. I was always trying to help customers as much as I could. But the reason that I sorry, I just had a call for a moment there, but the reason that I knew what the reason was that the store was failing. I knew the reason why sales were down. You know what the reason that sales were down? The reason that sales were down was because we were not price matching. I knew that for a fact. Whenever customers would bring stuff to our store, the same exact item was cheaper in that supermarket, significantly cheaper. Sometimes 25, 30%, even 50% cheaper in the supermarket than in our store. And our store policy was, specifically, it was do not price match. You cannot price match. You cannot do that. That is what our policy specifically was. And whenever, I know this because whenever I did returns, I would always write on the return slip what the reason was for the return. And the customers would say to me, oh, it's cheaper at the supermarket. That was like the number one reason people were returning. I should have stood up at that company meeting and I should have said to the district manager right then and there, I should have said to him, no, the reason that we're losing sales has nothing to do with customer service. It is because the competition is cheaper. If you want to get these customers back, you got to lower the prices. But because the company was so greedy, they didn't want to lower the prices. It's basic economics. The supermarket is and the thing, the supermarket has worse customer service than my store. My store had better customer service. But I'll tell you something. Customer service doesn't mean jack if customers can get the same item for 50% less at the supermarket. So even if that supermarket has the worst customer service, people are going to go there over our store because they're cheaper. Their stuff is way more cheaper and we don't price match. And that was the reason. So I would say, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Don't let these people roll all over you and say something back to them. I'm not saying to be curse them out or, be really nasty, but don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and say, no, you can't treat me like this, and basically explain to them, you're not going to treat me like this. That's basically what I would say. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, because I was so afraid to stand up for myself. I didn't know how to, and I let these people roll all over me. I let these people take advantage of me all the time. Okay, so we're back here. Sorry about that little, pause there. I just had a phone call I had to take care of. But moving on to point number 2, and this is pretty much universal. This isn't just for retail, but don't let them violate your breaks and check your pay. Now, this happens in so many jobs. It happened also in my dad's job, but it happens a lot in retail. I've noticed this happens a lot. And also, when I ask you guys, my viewers, on several different live streams, if this has happened to you, a lot of people that have worked in retail told me this thing happens to them all the time. So I've seen so many comments of people talking about this specifically. So what happens exactly? What's going on? Is when I'm talking about this here, I'm talking specifically about my country, America, but it can be applied to, any other country. I know there's different break laws in different countries, and also in America, each state has different break laws. The first thing I would say is to look up specifically what your state's break laws is. If this is your first job, which retail most likely is, a lot of people, their first job is retail, some kind of retail, make sure you read up exactly what your state's break laws are, exactly how long you can go after a break, how long your break is going to be. Do you get a paid 15-minute break? Some states will have that. Is it a paid, unpaid 30-minute break? But look it up exactly what the laws are on breaks and make sure that you have that memorized and you know what that is. Because I will tell you is that jobs will take advantage of you no matter what the law says. Now, when I first started working in retail, I was a 19-year-old naive kid. I didn't know that I had a 30-minute break. I didn't know that. And not only that, but the contract that I had with the company, it said that I had a 30-minute break. That was by law. But the extra thing is I had 2 paid 15-minute breaks if I was working a 9-hour shift. If I was working like on an 8-hour shift, I had 1 paid 15-minute and an unpaid 30-minute break. But if I was working a 9-hour, I'd have 2 paid 15s, and then on top of that, I would have that unpaid 30-minute break. Now I work 9-hour shifts. Nobody told me that I had a break at the time, and it wasn't until a few weeks in, one of my coworkers said, "Don't you want to go on break?" I said, "I have a break," and they said, "Yeah, you get a break." But nobody told me about that, and I felt stupid about that. But I was also pissed at my manager at the same time too that he didn't tell me about this. Now, what happened is, I had actually been taking those 30-minute breaks, for like about a year. But I didn't know about that. I had 2 extra paid 15-minute breaks when I had a 9-hour shift. So make sure that you read your employment contract. But anyways, about that is that one of my coworkers, she told me once, she said that if you try to take those 15-minute breaks, they're going to try to stop you. They'll try to make excuses. And she's like, watch this. And she tried to actually take the 15-minute break, and they were giving her excuses. But then when she brought up the contract, they couldn't do anything about it, and then she went and took the break. But what I've noticed is the biggest issue that comes up is that when you try to take a break in retail, when you try to, take a break, take your lunch, the managers and the supervisors, what they will do is they will go up to you a lot of times and they will say, oh, you can't take a break right now. We're busy. We got a lot of customers in the store. We need you here right now. If you take a break, we're all going to be behind. You're going to put more extra work on your coworkers. And what they're basically doing is they are guilt tripping you. They are guilt tripping you into not taking your break, and they want you to not take your break. And I've seen this happen so many times, and I've seen so many of your comments, guys, of you guys telling me that your bosses have done this exact same thing to me. This is pure scum. When somebody does this, this is just pure scum. Exactly what this is. It's just so scummy. And the thing is, my supervisor, what he would say a lot of times is he would say, and the manager would also say the same thing, they would say, oh, we don't take breaks. We don't take breaks. Well, that doesn't matter. That's you, if you're taking a break. I want to take a break. And here's the thing. Here's what I should have said. The supervisors and the managers, a lot of times they would get to sit in the office. Even if they're doing paperwork, they get to sit. But when you're in retail, in America at least, you don't get to sit. In most places in America, 95% of retail stores in America, you don't get to sit. So you are basically standing there 9 hours on that cash register. That's disgusting. That's ridiculous. And your legs, after a few hours, your legs just start hurting so much. That's why I always liked working on the floor, because on the floor I would get to walk around and stuff like that, and I wouldn't feel this pain. But then after a couple hours of standing in the exact same place, you just feel this horrible pain, and it's just so frustrating standing up. You just want to sit so badly. But that's the thing is, in American culture, and this is one thing I really don't like, in American culture, it is seen as laziness to sit at your job. Even if you can do the whole job sitting, it is seen as laziness. It is seen as being more professional. Ironic I'm using that word, but it's seen more professional to stand up. It's one of the stupidest things ever. It's a really dumb thing. But basically, to get to my point here is, they will try to guilt trip you into not taking your break. They'll say things like, oh, I don't take a break, even though they sit in the office. They get to at least sit while they get to eat while they're doing their paperwork and stuff like that. You don't get to eat at the cash register. Most places won't let you do that. Most places won't even let you have a water bottle at the cash register, which is just ridiculous. But they'll basically say, oh, we're going to be behind. You can't go on break. We got too many customers in the store right now. You're going to put more extra work. That is not your problem. It is not your problem if they're going to be behind. As long as you're doing all your work correctly, you're doing, your fair share of work, you're doing all your tasks, it is not your problem if they are behind if you go on break. It is not. It is their problem exactly there. What, you're supposed to not have a break? You're supposed to not have a lunch? You're supposed to not eat? What, because they're saying that they're going to be behind because there's more customers in the store? What is more important? Is it more important to, serve all these customers, or is your health more important? Is it, do you deserve a break? Do you deserve to rest? Do you deserve to get something to eat? Have a warm glass of tea, something like that. Is that not more important? Your health, filling up your stomach, getting something good to eat, and relaxing for half an hour, at least, taking a break, than, constantly standing at the register, constantly dealing with these customers. And so, honestly, what I would have said to the manager at this point is, if the manager did that, because they guilt tripped me a lot, and I didn't end up taking so many breaks because of it. If they said that to me again, you know what I would say to them? I would say to them, that's not my responsibility. If we're going to be behind, why don't you hire more people at this damn store? Hire more people. Because a lot of these companies are so greedy, they basically think that one person can do the job of 3 people. And that's why so many retail stores are so understaffed, because they barely hire anybody. And they think one guy can do all the work for everybody else. And so that is basically what I would say, is that it is not your responsibility. If they're saying, oh, we're going to be behind and stuff like that, that's not on you. That is on them right there. If they're going to be behind, they should have hired more people at the store. You should not be denied your break and stuff like that because of crap. Like, legally, they cannot stop you. They can maybe tell you about when you're supposed to take your break. Maybe 3 hours in or 4 hours, and they can set standards like that. But they cannot. As far as I know, I'm not a complete expert here, but as far as I know, they cannot deny you the break. You have to legally take the break. They can tell you the specific time, so you have to take the break, but they cannot deny you that break. So they might try to guilt trip you because they're trying to get you yourself to basically say, oh, I don't want a break. But they cannot actually stop you from taking a break. So if whatever the law is, look up what the law is in your state or in your country, wherever you are, and look up exactly when you can take a break, after how many hours of working, how long your shift has to be to get a break. Is it paid? Is it unpaid? How long is the break? Stuff like that. because they cannot stop you from that. And I'm saying it is so scum when managers do crap like that. Oh, we're going to be behind. You can't go on break. Bullshit, excuse my language, is you have the right to take a break, and they cannot guilt trip you or stop you from taking that break. You have the right to take that break. You want to take that break, you go ahead and take that break. You've been working for 3-4 hours in a row. You deserve a break. You deserve to get a warm meal. This is BS. Them doing stuff like this. And the second thing is, I wanted to also put this in here, also the pay, because this is also them doing this too. Make sure to check your pay. So here's the thing is a lot of people get direct deposits, but you also still get the check. I think it's the pay stub, that's what it's called. So you get a little document that basically shows, how long you worked, how many hours. Make sure you ask for that, because a lot of people, they don't ask their manager for that. They don't ask their manager for the check. They just get the direct deposit and they don't ask for the check. Now, one of the worst mistakes that I've made, and this is a really terrible mistake that I've made, is I didn't take out a calculator and calculate my hours. And that was one of the worst things I've done, because I think I got scammed. I think I've lost hundreds, possibly even thousands of dollars because I got scammed by the company. How I know about this is, remember how I told you guys about those 2 coworkers of mine that invited me to their wedding, right? Well, this is, years after I had already quit that retail place. But I actually talked to another one of my coworkers during that wedding, and she actually told me that, every single month, at least once a month, she had an error with her check where they had underpaid her. There were so many hours that she had worked and they had underpaid her, and then when she complained about it, they corrected it. And I never did that. I never took my checks, and I never I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. I'll admit it. I should have done it. I wasn't thinking that something like that could happen to me, but it probably did. If my other coworker got scammed like that, I definitely did too. I don't know how much this is. I don't have the pay stubs anymore, the checks. I don't even remember the hours that I worked in certain weeks, and so I really don't have any proof at this point. But I'm just gonna deal with it. It was just on me. I didn't really check it, but there's basically hours that I've worked for the company for free, hundreds of hours possibly for free. They scammed me. They stole from me. So that's what I say. I don't have 100% proof for this. But judging by what my coworker said, I believe it. If it happened to her, it probably happened to me. And so what I would recommend to avoid this happening to you, what I would recommend is to basically, take your paycheck that you get every single week and look at your schedule. Look at the hours that you've worked. Check the check. Check what days it is for specifically. Check your hourly rate on there and add up the hours. Multiply the hours by your rate and see if it adds up. See what your final amount is and see if it adds up. Because there are companies, they will do this. They will constantly subtract it. They will lie about it. They'll say, oh, he worked 5 hours less or something like that. So they'll mess with your pay. And I will tell you, this, not only is this illegal, but this is one of the most evil things that a boss can do, is something like this. Is honestly scamming their employees and making their employees work for free. That is just absolutely disgusting, just disgraceful. I cannot even believe that some managers would do something like that. That's just evil, doing something like that. Basically, free labor for the company, just pure greed. You're already getting paid a little bit above minimum wage. You're already getting paid a crap wage, but they get paid nothing for them doing that stuff. And I believe that my manager did that on purpose to my coworker. I think he did, because he would always talk about how when we weren't doing the job correctly, that he wasn't going to get his yearly bonus. He constantly complained about that. And so I think possibly he was taking those hours and maybe he was even giving it to himself. That was it. He was a very greedy guy. So I was an idiot for not checking. I should have checked. And my dad actually worked in a factory, and even though he worked in a factory, the exact same thing happened to him. So whatever job you're working at, make sure that you always do that. Make sure that you take a calculator and you calculate it and see if it is right. And if it's not right, you go to the management and you get the issue corrected. And you tell them that this is what you owe me at this point. Is I work these hours, I have the schedule right here, this is wrong. This check is wrong. And my dad told me that he's had constant errors at his factory, the exact same thing too. And they always said, oh, there is a mistake, but it's like, how many times can a mistake happen with pay? It's very difficult to prove that they're doing it intentionally, but but we pretty much know in our minds that they're doing it on purpose. But I remember my dad's famous words, when my dad told me in a line, I'll never forget my dad said. He said, they always accidentally gave me too little, but they never accidentally gave me more than I worked. That's what my dad says. So they always accidentally gave him too little. They accidentally always, missed a few hours, but they never accidentally gave him extra hours that he never worked on that check. So that's just, think about that too. It's just, companies scamming you, stuff like that. So like I said, don't let them violate your breaks. You are entitled to a break. They might be able to tell you the specific time that you have to take the break, but they can't tell you that you can't take a break in the end. And don't let them guilt trip you, say, oh, you're going to be behind. And also check your pay. Check that pay. And then number one, what is the number one tip that I can give for surviving retail? What's even more important than this? And it's the biggest mistake that I think I've made in my life. It's a mistake that I'm looking back on even years later, and I regret it so much. And that is, don't stay there for so long. Even though this entire video was a top 10 tips on how to survive retail, ultimately I would just say is don't stay there for too long. I'm not saying to never work in retail. I mean, this retail is a pretty easy job to get from most kids that are graduating high school and working in college. It's okay to get some extra side income, like if you're going to college or you're doing something else. But it is not a place that you want to make a career out of. It is not a place that you want to stay for years. I stayed there 6 years of my life, 6 years, and it hurts me even just thinking about it. It is, I should not have stayed there for so long. I stayed there for so long thinking that I was going to get more of a raise, thinking that I was going to get rewarded, thinking that something was going to come out of it, and I was just scared that I didn't know how to do anything else. That's what I was ultimately scared at. And even when I was working on YouTube, I was still working there in 2019, and what I was making on YouTube, I was making quadruple on YouTube what I was making in retail. But even though I was making 4 times as much on YouTube, I still worked in retail that year because I was just so used to it, and I didn't know how to quit it. I was basically scared. I spent 6 years at that job, and I was basically like scared to quit. I was scared, like, I mean, what else am I going to do? Is YouTube going to be able to sustain itself for me? Is that going to be enough? Because like YouTube was more than enough to pay the bills. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I wasn't, making good money. I was making good money on YouTube. I still am. But it was like, I was just scared. It's like, is YouTube gonna last? Is it gonna be like, is it safe to like quit retail? And my friends were all telling me, just quit, Pat. You're doing fine on YouTube. At that point, is like 2019. I had over a few 100,000 subscribers. I know I had like, I think 300,000 or 400,000 subs at that point. So I was doing fine. It was making a full living. But all my friends were telling me, Pat, just quit. You're doing fine on YouTube. But I was not listening to a lot of my friends who were, saying that to me. But that was it. Is I didn't know how to stay. I didn't know if I should quit or not. And then, eventually I got to the point where I said, I just got fed up with this. It just, one day, I don't know how to explain it. It just like one day something snapped in me. Just one day. It was like a combination of things. My pay, constantly covering people's shifts, all the time, them then messing with my schedule, being called in on days that I don't, being called in on days that I'm not supposed to be working, the terrible pay, the terrible raises, the customers cursing me out. And just one day I said, you know what? Screw this. I don't know how I got that courage. I don't know where that courage came from, but I'm glad it did. And at that point, I told my manager, because I was already working less and less. I was working like 2 or 1 days a week because I was unhappy. I told my manager to, cut my hours. And it was a different manager at that point. It was that manager was actually a nicer guy. It was a different guy. It wasn't the first guy. He tried to work with me. He did. I remember that he actually did get me a bit better raise. What that manager did was he actually promoted me to a pharmacy cashier because we had a pharmacy department. But not unlike the promotion scam that I was talking about, the pharmacy cashiers make a little bit more than the store cashiers. And he told me I never have to work in pharmacy. I never have to do there. He gave me his word on that, and he told me this will give you, a bigger raise so you're more happy. And he did that. That was like when he first started, but then it was like, and I did appreciate that he did that for me. That was a nice thing that manager did. But, then I was working for the next 3 years for him, and he was overall a great guy, that second manager. He tried his best, but his hands were tied because the company was just so greedy and selfish, and the company did not know how to treat its employees, and we lost so many good workers because of that. And eventually I told him I'm putting my 2 weeks in. And I would recommend to put your 2 weeks in if you are going to quit. I would not, walk out of your job unless it is something like extreme, unless it's something like really, really bad, going on, like, something, really, really nasty that day. I would not quit. I would at least just put your 2 weeks in if you're gonna quit. And the reason I put my 2 weeks in is because there was people at that job that I still liked. Like, there were supervisors that I respected. There was good supervisors. There were some shitty ones, excuse my language, but there was good ones too that I respected. And there were some of my coworkers that were my friends that I respected. And I didn't just want to walk out one day and just, mess them up like that. So basically I said to my manager, I'm put 2 weeks in so that you can find somebody in that 2 weeks, but after that I'm done. And my manager basically told me he understands. He didn't argue with me. But that was it. It was like, at that point, it was like my morale was just like so bad in retail. Like, I had basically given up all hope on this company. I had the company did not respect me, and I didn't feel like I should respect the company anymore. Like, I was always a very honest person. I always was. But what I started doing, like the last couple months that I started doing for that company, is I would basically I always volunteered to get the carts, and sometimes the carts were like even like so many blocks away. And what I would do is I would actually just go in the parking lot. I would go into like a back area and I would just sit on my phone, and I would just sit on my phone for like half an hour, and then I would tell the supervisors, at least the supervisors I didn't like, because I didn't really do it to supervisors that I liked. But the supervisors I didn't like, I would basically just tell them that I would tell them, oh, I had to get these cards. They were really far away when they weren't, because I was wasting time, because I just felt so mistreated by the company, and I did stuff like that. That I just wasted like half an hour, just wasted like half an hour just outside in the parking lot pretending to get cards, but in reality I wasn't doing anything. And I never did anything like that before. That was basically like the last few. I worked there for 6 years, and that was the last few months I worked there, because my morale had plummeted at that point. I felt so mistreated by the company, and that was it. I never stole anything from the company or anything like that. It was just that's the most that I've done is I've I basically had just wasted time in the parking lot pretending to get carts, but in reality I wasn't really doing anything because I just felt so disrespected by the company. But that was basically it. Is when I finally quit retail, I'll tell you, it was like I felt free. Like it was like a whole nother world, because I had like every Saturday I had worked and done sales signs every Saturday, and then I worked every Saturday. Every single Saturday I worked for like the last 4 years before that. And for the first time in like 4 years to not be working on a Saturday, it just felt weird. It just felt weird being at home. But at that point, I never looked back on it. My last day of work, I bought everybody McDonald's, because the people that I worked with, I liked them on my last shift, so I bought everybody some food. But that was basically it. I didn't know how to quit, and I stayed there for 6 years. 6 years of my life, can you believe that? But that was the biggest mistake that I made. One of the biggest mistakes I made in my life is I stayed there for 6 years. But once I quit, I felt, free. I felt like I wasn't dealing with this crap. And honestly, looking back, what I should have done is I should have done like Uber Eats or DoorDash, because that's when it started growing at that time when I was working in retail. And about Uber Eats and DoorDash, maybe it wouldn't have paid as well as retail, but I would have still made money. And at least I would have been able to work on my own schedule, and I wouldn't have had to deal with a boss or deal with all this BS, and most maybe some customers that complain about their food in stupid ways, but it wouldn't have been anything nowhere near as bad as like retail. But that's basically it. That's my advice, is that it's maybe retail is maybe a decent job to stay in for like maybe a year or two, as you're going to college or maybe trying to get some extra money, but it's not something you want to make a career out of. And don't be scared to change careers. It's ultimately is in America, we pride in the individual. It's ultimately about the individual, and you have to look out for yourself, and you're looking out for the place that's going to make you the most money, that's going to help you the most, and you have no loyalty to any kind of company. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you're working for them and you're doing their job for them as long as you're working for them. But you find another job that pays you better, go to that job. You have no loyalty to the first company, quit them and go to the next job. But that's basically what I wish that my younger self would have known, is that I shouldn't have stayed there for so long. But that was it. I'm sorry if I repeated some of the stories again that I said again, but that was basically it. I wanted to make this top 10 tips video on retail and my experiences in it, and hopefully this helps people out, and hopefully people can avoid some of this stuff that I went through, and hopefully you take some of my advice and not deal with this BS. So I hope this helps people out. I hope I wasn't too boring, and I hope this video wasn't too long. I know I talked over an hour, but I hope this video does help people out. And again, I don't want to get anybody fired, so like following this advice, like yelling back at your manager and stuff like that. But I'm just saying what I personally would have done is I would have started arguing with them, yelling back. I don't think I would have cursed at them, but I would have yelled back at them after just the crap that I had to deal with, and just the BS and being so scared of the managers all the time, never raising my voice against them. But I should have said something. But thank you guys for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. And again, thank you for everybody who supported my channel. You have helped me out tremendously. And, this channel is probably the biggest thing that's helped me get out of that situation. I don't have to work in retail ever again. But thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys on the next one. Take care, guys. And if you enjoyed this video, do drop a like. See you guys.